Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here, my next Avatar news update video. This one, I hadn't originally planned to do, but I saw a lot of reaction to this kind of piece of news, and I thought it was important that I kind of talk about it to get my thoughts out, and just, I suppose mainly get across that it's maybe not as big as you think it is. And that the news obviously is that Mike and Bryan at the Gallery Nucleus event and in so many interviews have basically announced that they're not working together anymore. Now, as a simple statement, you can put a lot of things together there. Like, oh, was there an argument? What does this mean for the future of Avatar? Is it over? Was there a big fight between the two? Whatever. But no, it's nothing like that. Basically, it's just that Mike and Bryan individually are not working on anything right now after Core is over. So naturally, they are not working together on something now the Core is over. So it makes sense that they would announce that they are not working together on something. It doesn't mean that they're not friends or anything like that. It just literally they are not working on anything right now because they just finished working on something that has taken a long time to work on, and they are tired after working on it. So that's the story basically. It's not as big as you think. Yes, it's kind of sad just to hear as an Avatar fan that they've made this announcement that basically for the next couple of years we won't hear anything about a new Avatar series coming out. And that is kind of sad to hear. There's not going to be a continuation of Korra or some new series coming out soon. But I think part of the reason why they specifically said to interviewers and stuff like that this is their plan and this is what they're doing is because there has been a lot of rumors of late that they are working on a new non-Avatar show together. And they made it very clear that they are just rumors. That is not the case. They're not working together on a new non-Avatar show or anything like that. They are not working on anything full stop, individually or together. And that's definitely the reason they announced it. They wanted to dispel a lot of these rumors and make it very clear to our fandom that, don't expect anything soon. And then it also kind of creates this whole dynamic of, when they kind of announce that they are working together again, that's when we get excited. And they did mention that they're completely open to working together again if a project comes up, if they decide that they want to work on something. For Avatar fans, really what this means is just that for the next couple of years, we shouldn't be waiting for an announcement of a new Avatar series. I think it's at least 2-3 years before we hear anything, if even that. These shows, making them take a lot out of Mike and Bryan because they're so involved at like every step. They're just kind of wrecked by the end of it. So they took a long break after Avatar The Last Airbender, and by all accounts Korra was an even tougher kind of show on them, so they're probably going to take an even longer break. And because Korra basically made Avatar a universe, it made it like not just this one show that was quite good, now it's 2 shows and there's comics and all this other stuff. Like, this is a kind of franchise now. They're just making it clear that right now there's no new next kind of animation thing planned in the franchise. And really, that's all there is to say about this topic. There is no drama really about this. This is purely an announcement just made to basically stop a lot of the rumors and stop a lot of the instant speculation of Korra's over, what's next. That, calm down, maybe in a couple of years it'll come back. Mike and Bryan have said they still have ideas basically for this Avatar universe. It's so big, how couldn't they? It's just they don't have anything planned just yet. So that's the news, but I also want to talk a lot about, basically bring up, transition from the news into a discussion topic. And that is a little bit of talk about the future of the fandom, the future of the franchise, Avatar, like what's next. And the main thing I want to say and discuss in this topic is primarily about the comics. I do want to talk about the comics a lot here, but really the main thing to say here is just that with no new show coming out, and the fact that I really do believe that our fandom really wants to stick around. After Avatar The Last Airbender ended, the fandom basically just kind of, for the most part, disappeared after it ended because we didn't really have any expectations for anything else coming out. The movie brought a couple of people back, and then the announcement of Korra brought a lot of people back. But now that is two shows, it is two shows and a lot of other stuff. Our fandom wants to stick around because this universe deserves to be talked about beyond just the couple of years that it aired for. And so, because of that, there has to be something that kind of keeps people talking about this universe. And what that is the comics. The comics are going to be so important now that Korra is over. And I really do think it's important that any fan who hasn't tried to read the comics or hasn't read all of them yet should really get into them. Should discover them for the first time now and try them out. Anyone who read a couple of them at the start didn't quite enjoy them. Now that Korra is kind of over and a lot of the focus is kind of like gone from that show, perfect time to focus yourself on the comics and get into them now that there's a good few of them released. Basically what the rest of this video is going to be is kind of basically explaining just how you get into Avatar comics. Like, what is the order of reading? What is there actually available to read Avatar comics wise? But to finish this kind of intro on this topic, the one thing that we know that's really continuing in terms of new Avatar story is the comics. Mike and Bryan may not be working together directly on stuff, but they're still assisting on the development of the stories for these comics. They're credited basically in all of these comics as having assisted on them. They may not be directly writing everything, but fundamentally the main core ideas and story arcs for these comics come from Mike and Bryan. And so they're going to continue to be assisting on those into the future, because we know at the very least there's probably 2, maybe 3 comic series still coming out, and they'll probably want to continue it after that because they're such good sellers. So let's get into kind of Avatar Comics 101. Most people who follow my channel probably know the whole thing about the comics and have probably read them all, because I focus heavily on them over the course of, basically since they were announced. I've reviewed them all on my channel and stuff like that. I assume most of my subscribers know exactly the way the comics work. But at the same time, there could be people who subscribe just for like episode reviews and stuff like that, who've never touched the comics because they had no idea how to get into them. So this is for those people and anyone kind of fairly new to the fandom who's just seen the shows and wants to know what's next. So, Avatar Comics. They started as Avatar The Last Airbender was airing in the official Nickelodeon magazine that was released. I think it was like monthly or weekly or whatever. And there was 1 or 2 comic strips in like each issue, and there'd be like a break and they weren't in it, and then they'd be in it again. But primarily, comics as we know them now started when Dark Horse Comics got the license for Avatar. And their first release, not including art books, first comic release was this, Avatar The Last Airbender, The Lost Adventures. What this is it's like a 220-page collection of all of those comics from the Nick comics, plus some other stories done exclusively for this book. And what this book is, it is, as it says, The Lost Adventures. All of these stories take place in between seasons and episodes of Avatar The Last Airbender. There's nothing incredibly earth-shattering that happens in this book and the stories here. There are a few nice canon kind of moments and reveals, like the back of the book mentions 4 questions that are answered in the book. Where did the last of the Airbenders hide? When was Zuko and Mei's first kiss? Who would win in an earthbending showdown, Toph or Boomy? And why did the Earth King decide to travel the world in the skies? All of those questions are answered in the various stories that you get here. And you have a section for Book 1 Water, and you have the various stories that take place in between episodes there. You have a Book 2 section, a Book 3 section, and then you have a little section at the back with some non-canon stories that were primarily made just for fun, like there's cookie bending and something like that introduced. They're fun. There's a chibi story as well at the back, so that's fun. And this I thought was a really good way to get people in, because it is not anything different. It's not a new story. It's just little stories that happen in between the show that you missed out on. Effectively, it's a book of filler episodes of Avatar The Last Airbender. And that's really cool. And this is ultimately the starting point for that, if you want it. It's readily available online, Amazon, stuff like that. And I think it's a really good book. It's 220 pages. You get to experience a lot of different Avatar artists in that book, so that's great. After that, Dark Horse actually started their first original comic series, where they were going to just tell one story and really make these kind of big stories. The first story is The Promise, and there's 3 parts, and that's the way basically the structure of the comics have been ever since. Each series is called, has a name, and there's 3 parts of it. Each part is 72 pages long and is in this kind of graphic novel style size. This is the size of a normal comic issue. This is the size of one of the Avatar graphic novels compared to it. A little bit smaller, but you get a lot of pages here. So, you got The Promise first. The Promise takes place immediately after the end of Avatar The Last Airbender. You get a little bit then, and then there's a time skip. A couple of months have passed, basically a year. Characters are a little bit older, and you basically deal with the fact that Zuko's the Fire Lord, Aang is the heroic Avatar, fully realized, and stuff like that. You get some nice character dynamics. Aang and Katara are obviously dating, but the primary focus of the story is on the fact that there is Earth Kingdom land that is kind of taken over by the Fire Nation during the war. What do you do with it now that the war is over and the Fire Nation kind of has to make amends for what it did? So you have conflict there between Zuko as the new Fire Lord and the people who want to keep things the way they were, and then Aang kind of fighting for the Earth Kingdom and stuff like that. It's a really cool story. You get a lot of drama between Aang and Zuko, good character development. It's not the best comic that we've ever gotten, but it was a solid start. And look at the art. Team Guru Huru on art. It's really good art consistently throughout. Jin Wen Yang is the main writer, but of course Mike and Bryan assist on the stories. And the main thing to say about all of these comics, 100% canon. Stuff in these comics is just as valid as the stuff in the shows. So that was the first series, The Promise. Available in these 3 parts, or you can get the hardcover collection, which is a big book. I have it just over there. I'm not going to get it out right now, because I have a crazy amount of books to show you guys. But either way it's good. You get a few extras in the hardcover, and the hardcover is probably a little bit cheaper than getting these 3 books separately. After that comes the next series, which is The Search. And this is a big one. This answers the question everyone's been waiting for. What happened to Zuko's mom? Ursa's right there on the cover. And over the 3 parts, The Search Part 1, 2, and 3, you get those answers. In addition to that, what happens to Azula after the series is touched on. You get some really cool spiritual stuff in this story as well. And it's incredibly surprising, but immensely interesting what the actual story of what happened to Ursa after she had to leave is. It's a really good series. As far as I'm aware, it just absolutely nailed that story. That story needed to be told, and these comics do that series incredible justice. And so again, 3 parts, also available in hardcover as well. The most recent comic that is just finished is this, The Rift. Again, 3 parts, and there's also a hardcover available. And now, as you can see from this, Zuko's not really in this series. It's more focused on Aang and Tough. And what it's about is effectively, Aang and Tough arguing about, where to go from here. Do you focus more on, as Aang kind of training the Air Acolytes, do you focus more on just doing everything like they did it in the past, or do you try and kind of move away from that and do things more towards the future? And you have their argument about, moving forward or staying in the past. And all of this is happening while Aang is kind of getting these weird visions from Avatar Yang Chen. There's this festival that he wants to bring back, and this factory is built over the place where that festival was due to take place. but and that it creates a lot of dynamics because ultimately the owner of that factory is Toph's father, and this is where the real story comes into play. The reference to the show is that this is the series that is going to basically resolve that issue between Toph and her father. That has been set up since the episode Toph was basically introduced in. And I think it explores that really well. The conflict between Aang and Toph is really well done. There's a really amazing spiritual aspect to this story as well that's also incredible. And just as you can see from like the covers as they go on, like here's the part 3 cover. Some really cool stuff happens in it, some really awesome fights. And you see Aang dealing with finding out that there's been like a whole town built over a very spiritual place to his people and stuff like that. So that's that. So they're the main 3 series, you know. You've had The Lost Adventures as a kind of one-off start to Avatar comics by Dark Horse. Then you have the Promise series, followed by The Search, followed by The Rift. Then, starting in September, is going to be Smoke and Shadow Part 1. This is the next trilogy of comics. There's going to be 3 parts once again. This series is going to be focused on Zuko again, and also May. And obviously, at the end of The Search, Ursa's back. I don't think it's much of a spoiler to really say that. It's focusing primarily on basically Zuko adapting to having his family back, how his family adapts to being back in the first place, and then resolving some of the issues between May and Zuko as well. Plus there's this whole new Ozai society that wants to get Ozai back into power, and you have a really cool Fire Nation political story kind of coming into play, with again some spiritual elements going on in the background. It looks set to be a really cool mystery. So that's starting in September. I think this part 2 is out in December, and then probably be like March 2016 when the next part comes out. So they're the main things that we have. We have, you know, the 3 series that are out right now, 1 series coming out in the next couple of months, and the one-off Lost Adventures. The only other things are a couple of Free Comic Book Day comics that were released. Free Comic Book Day takes place every May. I think it's like the first Saturday in May. And Avatar has had a few free comics. And primarily there are 2 that are worth mentioning. 1 is still to come out. So the first one, I didn't get a physical copy. I missed out on it. They're a little bit hard to get. But that is, basically it's called Avatar The Last Airbender Rebound, and it's all about May. And what it is it's about her dealing with events after the end of The Promise. So it takes place in between The Promise and The Search, basically. And you just focus on her dealing with the events that happened there. It's just a really quick story, only a couple of pages long. If you don't have the book because you didn't go to Free Comic Book Day, it's available all over the place. A lot of places have scans of it up, even our site, avatarthelastairbender.online.com. Ask in the comments and I'll post a link to it if you guys want. Last year's free comic book was this one. It's Avatar The Last Airbender Shells. This one's called Shells. And it's just a little Sakasuki story. Nothing really important to the universe overall. It's just addressing their relationship, that they are still dating, and how they affect the life of this girl they come across who's bullied and stuff like that. It's just a small story, meant to be a little bit inspirational, get more fans into Avatar comics, basically. But also this year, coming out in May, just in a couple of weeks actually, is going to be the next Avatar free comic, and that one's going to be about Ty Lee and Toph, dealing with is Ty Lee going to stay with the Kyoshi Warriors or not, because she's not quite feeling it. So that's going to be an interesting one. I think the events of that are going to link into Ty Lee's involvement with Smoke and Shadow. So they're beginning to connect a lot of stuff. But fundamentally, that's it. There's 4 series, The Lost Adventures, and 3 free comics. That's all there is in terms of the Avatar comic universe. I could get into some of the web comics and stuff like that, but primarily we're talking about comics that were released physically in paper form. And that's it. There's just a couple of series, they're all in order, and then a few kind of one-off stories that take place in between certain times. Like this story, we assume it takes place after The Promise, but there's no real way to place it exactly where it takes place. It's just a kind of one-off story. It doesn't really matter where it takes place, because it doesn't relate to anything. So that's it. The comics are important going forward. Really important. If you haven't read them, you you kind of need to read them now as an Avatar fan. Um, just because we don't have as I discussed in the news early on in this video, we don't have a show to look forward to. The next big thing for our fandom is the free comic in May. After that, it's Smoke and Shadow Part 1. And again, there's some cool stuff going to be happening in that. Will Mei and Zuko get back together as a couple? What's going to happen with Azula? There's a lot of big questions going on that people should be excited for. Azula's story didn't end at the end of Avatar The Last Airbender. As far as we're aware, her story, as far as we know, is still ongoing, and she's in an interesting place by the end of the Search comic. There's a lot of stuff that the comics have set up that is super interesting, and if you're a big fan, you need to read these comics to really know what's going on, because they're canon, and they're just as canon as the show. And you know, if you really want to consider yourself a big Avatar fan, I think you need to read these books. So I'm gonna end the video there. So thanks for watching, and bye.